Deputy Lisa Rodriguez, a 29-year-old corrections officer with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office in Phoenix, Arizona, had worked at the Estrella Jail facility for 6 years since graduating from the police academy in 2018. She was considered a competent and reliable officer by her supervisors, with no disciplinary actions in her personnel file and consistent positive performance evaluations throughout her career. Rodriguez lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Glendale, approximately 20 minutes from the jail facility. Her personal life was relatively quiet, with most of her social interactions occurring with fellow deputies and corrections staff. She had ended a 3-year relationship with a Phoenix police officer 8 months earlier, and had not been in any serious romantic relationships since the breakup. Her assigned duties at Estrella Jail included supervising inmates in the maximum security housing unit, conducting security rounds, and managing meal distribution and recreation periods for approximately 180 inmates housed in her assigned section. The facility housed individuals awaiting trial, serving short-term sentences, or being held on various criminal charges ranging from misdemeanors to serious felonies. Among the inmates under Rodriguez's supervision was Marcus Washington, a 31-year-old who had been arrested in February 2024 on charges of armed robbery and aggravated assault. Washington was awaiting trial after being denied bail due to his extensive criminal history and the violent nature of the alleged offenses. Court records showed that Washington had previous convictions for theft, drug possession, and assault, making him a repeat offender facing potentially lengthy prison time if convicted. Washington had been housed at Estrella Jail for 7 months by the time the events in question began unfolding in September 2024. During this period, he had been involved in 2 minor disciplinary incidents related to altercations with other inmates, but had generally maintained acceptable behavior within the facility's structured environment. According to statements later provided by other inmates and corrections staff, Washington was charismatic and articulate, capable of engaging in intelligent conversations despite his limited formal education. He had developed a reputation among both inmates and staff as someone who could mediate disputes and provide informal leadership within the housing unit. The inappropriate relationship between Rodriguez and Washington began developing in late August 2024, according to surveillance footage and testimony later provided during internal affairs investigations. Initial interactions appeared professional and routine, consistent with Rodriguez's duties to maintain security and order within the housing unit. However, video analysis revealed that Rodriguez began spending increasing amounts of time in conversation with Washington during her rounds, often lingering near his cell for extended periods while other inmates received minimal attention. These conversations initially focused on Washington's legal case and his concerns about his upcoming trial, topics that fell within acceptable boundaries for officer-inmate communication. The relationship evolved beyond professional parameters when Rodriguez began providing Washington with special privileges that were not extended to other inmates. She allowed him additional time outside his cell, provided access to extra commissary items, and facilitated phone calls that exceeded the standard limitations imposed on inmates awaiting trial for serious felonies. Other inmates in the housing unit began noticing Rodriguez's preferential treatment of Washington and started making complaints to other corrections officers about the apparent favoritism. However, these complaints were initially dismissed as typical inmate grievances about perceived unfairness in the jail's operational procedures. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. By September 2024, the relationship had escalated to physical intimacy, according to evidence later discovered by internal affairs investigators. Rodriguez had begun bringing Washington to maintenance areas and storage rooms within the facility during her night shifts, when supervision was minimal and surveillance coverage was limited in certain sections of the jail. Security camera footage from September 15th and September 22nd showed Rodriguez escorting Washington to areas outside the normal housing unit, ostensibly for cleaning duties or equipment maintenance. However, the duration of these absences and the locations involved were inconsistent with legitimate work assignments and raised questions about Rodriguez's adherence to security protocols. The affair created significant security risks within the jail facility, as Rodriguez's compromised judgment and emotional attachment to Washington affected her ability to maintain appropriate professional boundaries with all inmates under her supervision. Her colleagues began noticing changes in her behavior, including increased nervousness, defensive responses to routine questions, and reluctance to discuss her assigned duties in detail. Additionally, Rodriguez's preferential treatment of Washington created tension among other inmates, who began viewing the situation as evidence of corruption within the corrections system. Several inmates started making subtle threats about reporting the inappropriate relationship to jail administrators, or using their knowledge of the affair as leverage for their own special treatment. The situation became more complex when Washington began pressuring Rodriguez to provide assistance with his legal case, including requests that she contact potential witnesses, deliver messages to associates outside the jail, and provide information about prosecution evidence that might be accessible through law enforcement databases. Rodriguez initially resisted these requests, recognizing that such actions would constitute serious violations of her oath as a law enforcement officer and could result in criminal charges against her. However, Washington's emotional manipulation and her deepening attachment to him gradually eroded her resistance to participating in illegal activities. The crisis intensified in early October 2024 when another inmate, Jerome Butler, witnessed Rodriguez and Washington together in a storage room during what was clearly an intimate encounter. Butler, 34 years old and serving time for burglary charges, had been housed in the same unit as Washington for several months and had observed the developing relationship with growing interest. Butler recognized the significant value of his knowledge about the affair and began considering how he might use this information to his advantage. His criminal history included several instances of blackmail and extortion, and he immediately understood that Rodriguez's position as a corrections officer was in jeopardy. Officer made her vulnerable to manipulation if her misconduct were exposed. On October 8, 2024, Butler approached Rodriguez privately during her shift and informed her that he had witnessed her activities with Washington. He made clear that he understood the serious consequences Rodriguez would face if her supervisors learned about the inappropriate relationship, including criminal charges, loss of employment, and potential imprisonment. Butler's initial demands were relatively modest, requesting special privileges similar to those Rodriguez had been providing to Washington, including additional phone time, commissary access, and relaxed enforcement of housing unit rules. Rodriguez, terrified of exposure, agreed to Butler's requests, while hoping that satisfying his demands would prevent him from reporting her misconduct. However, Butler's demands escalated quickly as he recognized the extent of Rodriguez's desperation to keep the affair secret. Within days, he was requesting that Rodriguez provide him with information about other inmates' legal cases, facilitate communications with associates outside the jail, and even consider smuggling contraband items into the facility. Rodriguez found herself trapped between Washington's emotional manipulation and Butler's increasingly aggressive blackmail demands. Her stress levels became apparent to other corrections staff, who noted her erratic behavior, frequent absences from assigned duties, and obvious anxiety during routine interactions with supervisors. The situation reached a breaking point on October 18, 2024, when Butler informed Rodriguez that he intended to demand monetary payments in exchange for his continued silence about her affair with Washington. He specified that Rodriguez would need to provide him with $5,000 within 2 weeks, or he would report her misconduct to internal affairs investigators. Rodriguez's financial resources were limited, as her deputy salary provided modest income that barely covered her basic living expenses and student loan payments from her criminal justice education. The demand for $5,000 represented several months of her discretionary income and would require her to borrow money or engage in additional illegal activities to obtain the necessary funds. Desperate to resolve the situation before it spiraled further out of control, Rodriguez began considering extreme measures to eliminate the threat posed by Butler's blackmail demands. Her research into potential solutions, later discovered through analysis of her personal devices, included internet searches about prisoner deaths, suicide rates in correctional facilities, and methods of causing accidents that would not attract suspicion. Rodriguez's planning became more systematic when she realized that Butler's death would not only eliminate his blackmail threats, but would also remove the primary witness to her affair with Washington. Her position as a corrections officer provided her with detailed knowledge of jail security procedures, surveillance blind spots, and opportunities to access inmates without arousing immediate suspicion. The murder occurred during Rodriguez's night shift on October 25, 2024, when staffing levels were minimal and most inmates were confined to their cells for overnight lockdown. Rodriguez had volunteered to work overtime that evening, ostensibly to earn additional income, but actually to ensure she would have the access and opportunity needed to carry out her plan. At approximately 2:30 a.m., Rodriguez used her security access to enter Butler's cell, claiming to conduct a routine welfare check in response to reports of suspicious activity. She found Butler awake and immediately engaged him in conversation about his blackmail demands, suggesting that she was prepared to discuss payment arrangements. However, Rodriguez had brought with her a makeshift weapon fashioned from jail maintenance supplies, specifically a metal tool handle that she had sharpened to create a stabbing implement. When Butler turned away from her during their conversation, Rodriguez attacked him from behind, inflicting multiple wounds to his neck and torso. The assault was brief but fatal, with Butler dying from blood loss within minutes of the attack. Rodriguez attempted to stage the scene to suggest that Butler had been killed by another inmate, possibly as a result of the ongoing tensions and violence that periodically occurred within the jail facility. However, Rodriguez's staging efforts were ultimately unsuccessful due to the sophisticated investigative capabilities available to law enforcement agencies and the extensive surveillance systems operating within the jail. Blood pattern analysis revealed inconsistencies with her suggested scenario, and security camera footage showed that no other inmates had access to Butler's cell during the relevant time period. Additionally, Rodriguez's behavior immediately following the discovery of Butler's body raised suspicions among her colleagues and supervisors. She appeared unusually calm and composed for someone who had allegedly discovered a brutal murder scene, and her account of events contained details that seemed rehearsed rather than spontaneous. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more shocking true crime stories. Let us know in the comments what you think was Rodriguez's biggest mistake in trying to cover up Butler's murder. The investigation into Butler's death was conducted jointly by the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office Internal Affairs Division and the Arizona Department of Public Safety Criminal Investigations Unit. The multi-agency approach ensured that potential conflicts of interest were minimized and that the investigation maintained appropriate objectivity, despite Rodriguez's status as a law enforcement officer. Digital forensics analysis of Rodriguez's personal devices revealed her research into methods of causing inmate deaths and her systematic planning for Butler's murder. Browser history, deleted text messages, and social media activity provided investigators with comprehensive evidence of premeditation and criminal intent. The investigation also uncovered the full extent of Rodriguez's inappropriate relationship with Washington, including physical evidence of their intimate encounters and documentation of the special privileges she had provided him. This evidence established the motive for Butler's murder, while also supporting additional criminal charges against Rodriguez. Washington initially denied knowledge of Rodriguez's relationship with Butler or her plans to eliminate the blackmail threat. However, when confronted with evidence of his own involvement in requesting illegal assistance from Rodriguez, he agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for consideration during his upcoming trial. Washington's testimony provided crucial details about Rodriguez's state of mind leading up to Butler's murder, including her expressions of desperation about the blackmail situation and her research into methods of solving her problems permanently. His cooperation also helped investigators understand the timeline of events and the motivations behind Rodriguez's criminal actions. The arrest of Deputy Lisa Rodriguez occurred on November 2, 2024, following completion of the initial investigation and accumulation of sufficient evidence to support criminal charges. She was taken into custody at her apartment without incident, though she initially maintained her innocence and claimed that Butler's death had resulted from inmate violence unrelated to her actions. Rodriguez was charged with first-degree murder, sexual conduct with an inmate, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and violation of her oath of office. Under Arizona law, the murder charge carried potential penalties including life imprisonment or death, while the other charges could result in additional decades of incarceration. The case attracted significant media attention throughout Arizona due to the serious breach of public trust involved in a corrections officer's criminal conduct and the vulnerability of inmates who depend on law enforcement for their safety and security. Law enforcement organizations used the case to emphasize the importance of maintaining professional boundaries and ethical conduct among corrections staff. The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office implemented immediate changes to its supervision and monitoring procedures following Rodriguez's arrest. Additional surveillance equipment was installed in previously unmonitored areas of jail facilities, and new protocols were established for documenting officer-inmate interactions and preventing inappropriate relationships. The trial of Lisa Rodriguez began in March 2025, with prosecutors presenting evidence of systematic misconduct leading to premeditated murder. The prosecution argued that Rodriguez had violated her oath as a law enforcement officer, compromised jail security, and ultimately committed murder to cover up her criminal behavior. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological dynamics of inappropriate relationships between corrections officers and inmates, explaining how such relationships compromise institutional security and create dangerous situations for all individuals within correctional facilities. The testimony helped establish the serious nature of Rodriguez's misconduct even before the murder occurred. Rodriguez's defense strategy focused on arguing that her relationship with Washington had been consensual and that Butler's murder had been an impulsive response to blackmail pressure rather than a premeditated crime. Defense attorneys attempted to portray Rodriguez as a victim of manipulation by both Washington and Butler. However, the extensive evidence of Rodriguez's research and planning contradicted claims about impulsive behavior, while expert testimony about power dynamics in correctional settings undermined arguments about consensual relationships between officers and inmates. The jury deliberated for 12 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Rodriguez was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole for the murder conviction, plus additional consecutive sentences totaling 35 years for the other charges. Jerome Butler's family filed wrongful death lawsuits against Maricopa County and the Sheriff's Office, arguing that inadequate supervision and security protocols had enabled Rodriguez's criminal conduct and failed to protect Butler from harm while in custody. The litigation resulted in settlements totaling $1.2 million and additional reforms to jail operations. Marcus Washington eventually pleaded guilty to his original charges in exchange for a reduced sentence that acknowledged his cooperation with the murder investigation. He received 12 years in prison and was transferred to a state facility outside Maricopa County to serve his sentence. Lisa Rodriguez is currently serving her sentence at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. She has filed appeals challenging her conviction and sentence, though legal experts consider her chances of successful reversal to be minimal given the strength of the evidence against her. The case prompted legislative hearings about conditions in Arizona, correctional facilities, and the need for enhanced oversight of interactions between corrections staff and inmates. New laws were enacted requiring additional training, supervision, and accountability measures for corrections officers. The Rodriguez case remains a significant example of how personal misconduct by law enforcement officers can escalate to serious violent crimes when individuals attempt to cover up their initial wrongdoing rather than accepting responsibility and facing appropriate consequences through proper channels. Training programs developed following the case emphasize the importance of maintaining professional boundaries, recognizing signs of inappropriate relationships, and reporting concerns about colleague behavior before situations deteriorate to the point where violence becomes a perceived solution to personal problems.